Colleagues, firstly I must thank you all for attending this year's conference here in White's Hotel in the great county of Wexford, and a sincere thank you to all of the staff and management for all their hard work over the past months in order to make this year's conference a success. There are so many people that make it possible for us to gather here today, and I thank you all sincerely for your hard work. This year's conference is the 48th conference of the P&A, and the past year has probably been one of the busiest and indeed most challenging of its long history. I am glad to say that the union has remained strong in those years and continues to grow in strength and numbers. I am pleased to report our membership has grown despite the recruitment and retention crisis. 500 new members joined in the first 4 months of this year. This is an unprecedented number of new members, and under normal circumstances it would be October when new registrations take place before this number would be reached. Every year at conference we now see new faces. A new generation has stepped up, and more we can see the massive effect that this can have. The baton being passed from one to another, new branches establishing themselves and their voices, and the rekindling of branches with new and fresh faces and opinions. Our branches are the root of our organisation, and it is such a privilege to stand here today with you all. At last year's conference, I spoke of the deplorable situation within CHO5. Our colleagues within Kilkenny and Waterford Mental Health Services regularly have to inform patients and families that unfortunately there was no bed, so you will have to be nursed in a chair, explaining to families that due to overcrowding, their loved one would have to sleep on a mattress on the floor, usually in a common area, beds shoved into any available space. Men, women and children shoved into any available space, and dignity shoved out the window. 12 months on and 16 months after the action initially commenced, it continues, but slowly things have started to change. Due to the P&A's action, a number of initiatives have been put in place to deal with the capacity issue. Additional beds have been made available in the private sector to alleviate the overcrowding on both wards. Short, medium, long-term initiatives have also been discussed in relation to capacity, the main goal being the establishment of 2 new acute units in CHO5 based in Waterford and Kilkenny. These units will increase bed capacity and hopefully maintain a proper structure of acute care within the region. There has also been a concentrated effort in the area to limit the number of delayed discharges within the service, and in doing so, releasing further beds. Primary care centres have been established in Waterford and Dungarvan. Day hospital services have also commenced in the primary care in Waterford on a Monday to Friday basis, and will move to 7/7 when staff recruitment has been finalised. On the back of these changes and the reduction in the frequency of overcrowding within the acute units, the employer requested we stand down our industrial action, considering the numerous changes that had taken place. At that point in time, it was decided by the branches to withdraw the action in Grangemore and St Aidan's unit in Waterford, but to maintain the action in the acute units if and when the units were to go above capacity. We believe that this will maintain the deterrent of admitting over-licensed numbers in both areas due to the fact we only engage our industrial action when we go over those licensed numbers. Following this, in March 2019, the employer requested that we withdraw our action completely. Following a regional meeting of all the CHO branches in CHO5, the decision was made to reject this request on the basis that the HSE had not yet done enough to reassure our members that long-term change would happen. The reasons given for these doubts were as follows. In CHO5, we still experience the transfer of patients onto the acute unit without status, resulting in individuals with no status on the wards. On several occasions, the discharge of patients to bed and breakfast accommodation, A clear attempt, we believe, to hide the major problem within the service and a recipe for complete disaster. Another practice has seen patients who were on leave returning to the DOP during the day in order to attend groups. This has resulted in the DOP becoming a de facto day hospital, another attempt to give the impression of services where none exist. The continued admission of children onto the acute adult wards. 3 admitted in 1 week at the end of March. This is completely unacceptable practice under the Mental Health Commission guidelines and is yet seemingly being ignored by the Commission themselves. Following an unannounced inspection, the Mental Health Commission took the unprecedented steps of taking proceedings against a HSE in relation to the conditions in St Luke's Hospital in Kilkenny. The HSE were fined €5,200 by the judge. It was described as the first action of its kind taken by the Mental Health Commission under the Mental Health Act. The inspectorate function of the Mental Health Commission is a hugely important one, the judge said. For too long in this country, mental health issues have been ignored and stigmatised. The testimony of the inspectors and photographs taken during the inspection are the physical manifestation of the lack of care. What makes this worse is that the facilities here are for those that are housed and the most vulnerable people. Those people matter, and the environment which they are cared for matters, the judge said, adding that were it not for the inspectorate process, there would be no mechanism to bring such conditions to the outside world. The P&A would echo these sentiments. We would agree that the Commission is the only office that can properly deter poor standards. We believe they have and should have the powers to protect the most vulnerable. What we don't understand or accept is the blatant disregard to tackle the real issue. Of the 4 charges led against the HSE on the day in February, 2 were in relation to hygiene and 2 more in relation to delays in signing seclusion forms within 24 hours. I do not wish to minimise these charges in any manner or suggest in any way that these issues are not important, but it is bewildering to the P&A that these issues, such as child admissions, mattresses on floors, the elderly in chairs, could be ignored for well over a year, only to take the HSE to the courts over paperwork. This is a very poor indication of what is prioritised and what is not, and can only leave us questioning where we are going. Time and time again, members of the P&A have raised concerns regarding conditions our patients must endure, the lack of services throughout the country and the unacceptable levels of nurse cover. And yet, although they would appear to be sympathetic, no change is forthcoming. I call on all parties and all stakeholders to join the P&A in achieving what our patients deserve. We cannot continue the cycle of trying to make the broken system work. We must embrace the dream and make it a reality. This task should not be to meet basic standards, but to create high standards. The time has come to embrace an era where we join up the dots and realise that having only part of the puzzle in place does not complete it. For too long, we have heard the response of successive governments that services are being delivered across the country without ever stating the truth, that the vast majorities of these services are under-resourced, understaffed and at breaking point. It's time for honesty and commitment by the government to the mental health services and prioritised. The P&A has decided to continue its current action as it stands. We will once again re-examine the situation this week, but unless there are clear improvements in relation to the continued overcrowding, the inappropriate admissions of children and the lack of viable community initiatives, the action will continue. Although we are hopeful that this issue can be resolved, the current situation and how admissions and discharges are being handled in CHO5 must be rectified in order for both services to progress and our members to have the ability to practice in a safe manner while upholding the dignity and respect of our patients. I wish to thank all the branches within CHO5 for their continued vigilance and support throughout the industrial action thus far, and in particular the Waterford branch and St Canice's branch for their relentless thirst to seek justice and reason. I would like to speak for a moment about the CAM services. The HSE recently confirmed that 513 clinical posts are now vacant within the service, that 40% of all posts are vacant, and that the service only operates at 50% capacity as set out in the Vision for Change. Behind these statistics, there are families. Behind these statistics are 3,000 children who have yet to be assessed, and beyond these statistics is a future of uncertainty and fear for many. Thankfully, the Junior Minister for Mental Health has assured the public that 222 CAMS posts are at various stages of the recruitment process, and that he plans to announce details of a €3 million resilience fund in order to facilitate community mental health groups to be more resilient. To ensure that there was no other meaning to the word, I looked it up. Resilience, toughness, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It sounds fair enough. Wouldn't we all like to be more resilient? It would be nice to have the capacity to recover quickly. Unfortunately, in most of these cases, the families in question may find that easier said than done, considering that they are waiting to be assessed, just to know what the difficulty is. But it's okay, you don't need a diagnosis to be tough. A bit of toughness goes a long way. It almost suggests that attitude is the main concern, not the years on waiting list. It almost suggests that it is down to the child's capacity, not the fact that the child has so many questions that are not answered. On answering the questions, the Minister went on to say, take a 14-year-old child with psychosis coming into an emergency department. We can't have a consultant psychiatrist waiting in the ED for that one presentation. Down the line, we will be looking at having a consultant psychiatrist in an office and a screen on a cart in the ED to assess, diagnose and prescribe. These comments are shocking and somewhat surprising. Surprising that we can be capitulated so quickly from a service that still relies heavily on fax machines to one that actually provides information technology infrastructure, but incredibly shocking that the Minister would use the example he did. He does sound practical, he certainly sounds fiscally prudent, but he most certainly does not sound compassionate. Let's for a moment imagine the other side of the story. For example, let's call this 14-year-old Matthew. Matthew has spent 2 years on a waiting list to be assessed by the CAM service. The referral was initiated when Matthew started first year. He was having problems. He found it difficult to concentrate, communicate, and he made very few friends. Over the past few months, he has started to isolate himself. He doesn't sleep like he used to. He paces the floor at night. His parents can't sleep either. They are at the point of collapse. One night it becomes unbearable. Their son is now paranoid about them. He questions what they are going to do to him. Instead of them being his loving parents, they are now seen as a threat. In desperation, they attend the local ED department. At this point, they just need some kind of respite, a moment where someone else will take charge, where someone will try to explain to their son that they are not trying to hurt him, they are only trying to help him. Someone that can reassure them that no matter what, the love of their lives will be okay and that everything is going to be fine. And then someone wheels out a screen on a cart. I can see why no minister has come to face us this conference for the second year in a row. I say to them, if a screen on a cart and a dose of PRN resilience is the best that we can hope from our ministers, don't bother coming. The Psychiatric Nurses Association voted overwhelmingly in favour of industrial action up to and including strike action in December 2018. This was in protest at the continued failures of the government to bring forward realistic proposals to address the recruitment and retention crisis in nursing. Nurses voted 95% in favour of industrial action in the ballot, which followed the rejection by the P&A of the totally inadequate proposals by the Public Service Pay Commission report in September to address the recruitment and retention issue. Following this, the P&A began an embargo on additional hours in late January and early February. This highlighted the absolute resilience on overtime to run services across the country. From Dublin to Cork to Galway and back again, the impact was felt. Nurses up and down the country stood in solidarity to say enough is enough. Where there were too few to take up duty, they politely informed their nurse management that they would not take up duty until there was enough to satisfy basic health and safety. When we were told that there was no one coming, they were not moved. They were not for moving, and neither were their colleagues who stayed on the wards. We saw this, and time again, nurses who had finished their own long shifts stayed on to ensure that patient care was maintained in order for their colleagues to send the message that everyone knew had to be heard. Over the days and nights, we saw the best of what this organisation can do. We stood as one. It took every single one of us to stand up in order to provide the support for those who had to take the stance. Individuals can do amazing things, but the individual who has an army behind them can achieve more. For those who went above and beyond, some staying on wards for 24 to 36 hours, I thank you. Your sacrifice is greatly appreciated by the Officer Board of the P&A and every member of this union. On the 9th of February, the P&A took part in a rally by nurses which marched from the Garden of Remembrance on the north of the city to the shadow of the government buildings in the south. The atmosphere and the solidarity that was felt by all who attended was palpable. It took over an hour for the 50,000 nurses that attended to stream into Merrion Square. It was a great pleasure to witness the hundreds of P&A flags and the thousands of P&A members and their families and friends gather in what was an epic show of strength. Prior to our commencement of strike action on the 19th, 20th and 21st of February, the P&A attended a Labour Court under Section 26.5 of the Industrial Relations Act in order to attempt to resolve the stalemate. Following a request to give time to a negotiation process, the strike was suspended. What followed was a long and protracted negotiations under the auspice of the workplace relations that ultimately led back to the court and then back to further discussions. The Labour Court then made a recommendation in relation to the general services. The P&A were not party to this recommendation, and although we are aware of its contents, there was a long distance between the recommendation and its transposition to mental health. Since that time, we have engaged with the HSE, Department of Health and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to agree on how this can be done. We have sought, in line with the Oireachtas Committee on Mental Health's own recommendation, the establishment of allowances within mental health that are specific to the sector. We have also discussed the duties required and the pathway to the enhanced nurse practice scale recommended in the Labour Court recommendation 21900. This process has been slow and engagement has been difficult at times due to the level of mutual understanding required to establish an entirely new nursing scale. Nonetheless, there is absolutely no ambiguity with the employer as to where the P&A stands. The ball is firmly within their court, and movement now must come from the other side. We have continuously emphasised the need to resolve the issues at hand, but yet resolution has not been forthcoming. Due to this totally unacceptable stance by the employer, our General Secretary has referred the issue back to the Workplace Relations Commission. And I know Peter updated you to where we are at with that yesterday. Although I am aware that this topic has been discussed in its own allotted time slot period yesterday, I do wish to make some points. Throughout my time on the negotiation team, led by our General Secretary Peter Hughes and our full-time officials, it became very obvious to me that no one within the HSE disagreed with us when we told them that there was a crisis within the mental health nursing. In fact, time after time, the tone was that of sympathy and empathy toward our plight. The conversation with many was the same. Something had to change. The time for the nods of agreement and sympathetic tongues is over. The employer must step up and inform the paymasters that without drastic immediate change, there is no coming back. We have been extremely patient throughout this process and have, over the last 3 years, going back to our campaign in 2016, continuously highlighted the difficulties within the mental health sector and the consequences of inaction over the last decade. We took action in 2016 and again in 2019 to reiterate the call for action. Over the years, we have witnessed the closure of the institutions and the establishment of the promise that was never fulfilled. We as nurses have broken our backs to keep the place afloat at times, and it felt impossible. When it was exhausting to do so, we have served our patients with dignity and respect, even when conditions were at their very worst. We have carried 700 out of the total number of 1,300 nursing vacancies in the HSE, and we are still here. We are not going away. I would say this to the ones who would say no. Look at where we have come from without 1 hour of strike, and look at how much disruption was caused by an overtime ban which was carried out in the bleak midwinter. To those who would impede a resolution, I say this: a summer of discontent would be much harder to weather. Our members within the intellectual disability sector have continued to experience the same difficulties in recruitment and retention as we have in the mental health. Decongregation in many areas, along with the continued drive to introduce a social care model in some areas, has created an atmosphere where more and more responsibilities are placed on the shoulders of fewer and fewer nurses. The Shaping of the Future of Intellectual Disability Nurses in Ireland's report, published last year, has set out the new approach to the RNID nursing that would maintain and promote the grade into the future, a plan that would see the nurse as an integral part of the lifetime care. I call on the HSE to immediately set about the implementation of its own report. We cannot stand by and see ongoing situations that would expect impossible from fewer and fewer nurses. The HSE and other employers must ensure that the RNID nurse are not deserted but promoted and facilitated to ensure that they will continue to have the ability to enhance the professional development of the RNID grade and the lives of their patients. Earlier I discussed the rise in our numbers over the first few months of this year, and although this is massively important, our numbers are not our main strength, our philosophies are. Philosophies guide our fundamental belief in proper working conditions, safe environments of practice, and the demand of the highest possible standard of care based on best practice and positive outcomes. Now more than ever, I believe we must stand by these beliefs. And if we can do that, we can continue to challenge the philosophies of government after government that have now led to this sorry state of mental health care within this country. A system that continuously ignores the needs of the most vulnerable, turns a blind eye on the thousands of children on waiting lists waiting for help, refuses to acknowledge the cliff edge crisis that is recruitment and retention, and would turn to the private sector in order to resolve the public sector problem of lack of investment. In doing so, spending more and more taxpayers' money instead of investing in public services. Throughout the last year and beyond, the focus of the P&A has been on the continued campaign to alleviate the recruitment and retention crisis within mental health services, and to implore those in the position of power to make the necessary changes to ensure that the people who care for are in the position to receive the care that any ethical society would afford them. An ethical society would not ignore the 3,000 children on waiting lists for CAM services, or indeed their parents who suffer the agonising wait and wonder if their child will receive the care they need before it's too late. An ethical society would not ignore the homeless or the suffering they endure, and would not ignore the stress and anxiety of finding a new place to lay your head every night. Mental health reform's own work on this issue found, in a number of cases, it was the service users' mental health difficulties which had induced their experiences of homelessness. Their numerous hospital admissions severely compromised their ability to sustain employment and secure stable accommodation. The cycle continues. Until we are in a position to provide support to these individuals, support that will allow them to maintain their lives in their homes, the cycle will never stop. Vision for Change was the hope. It was an inspirational document that saw many avenues to care and would allow the individuals to access service in a manner that was most appropriate for them. Acute services, psychiatry of later life, CAM services and community services would run side by side in order to facilitate the individualised care plan devised by the multidisciplinary team. This endeavour was to achieve easy access to the most appropriate care. Over a decade later, we are left with the remnants of a service that was never properly resourced, like a luxury residential complex, now classed as a ghost estate. Instead of easy access to appropriate services, the only possible access now in some areas is the acute unit. The lack of development of community teams has sent individuals seeking care to the inpatient unit time and time again. This is incredibly ironic considering the level of derision laid upon the institutions when government wanted them closed. Now they remain silent as their new institutions remain at full capacity. Where are their cries now? Where are all the politicians who would cry foul of our current circumstances? 20% of all acute patients have been there for 6 months or longer due to having no place to go or no service to go to. Where are the cries for this? Children increasingly being admitted to adult units, the elderly living months of their lives in acute psychiatric units hoping that they will receive a bed in the private sector, the patients waiting transfer to the forensic services, the patients waiting addiction services or detox services. And with so many stories leading different lives, now imprisoned within a service that in many areas can only provide immediate care but no pathway out of it. I must also report we have continuously pressed the HSE over the past months to sanction the payment of Time and 1/6. This agreement has been ratified since last summer, with the date for payment being July 1st, 2018. Although this will be retrospectively paid, it has been incredibly frustrating. We have been assured by the employer that this will be sanctioned and the issue of payment will come in the next fortnight, so we're hopeful. Before I finish, I must mention the ongoing fight for the P&A to represent our members working within the National Ambulance Service. This has seen the Nazareth branch of the P&A commencing a campaign of strike action, protest and political activism in order to have a fundamental right to be represented by the union of their choice, a union with almost 50 years of service to representing members within the health sector. The members of the Officer Board and myself are extremely proud of the branch and for the absolute steadfast level of commitment that the members of the branch have had to the P&A and each other. Our ambulance service personnel members have marched on picket lines, rallied both outside government buildings and within them. They have sat in the gallery of Dáil Éireann as members of the Oireachtas have supported them below, and throughout this they have maintained their dignity, integrity and respect for others, something that cannot be said about the HSE. The entire campaign has been one of misinformation by the employer, who would suggest time and time again that this is an inter-union dispute. We have no dispute with any other union in relation to our members in the National Ambulance Service and will continue to fight for the fundamental rights that are being denied to them. The employer will not communicate by any other means other than through a legal team, the cost of which will be sought once available in order to highlight the absolute shocking waste of taxpayers' money. The message is clear and the message will not change. The P&A will not relent. We will not go away, and the one thing we don't understand is the word no. Finally, I wish to thank the entire Officer Board and the office staff for their ongoing work and dedication to the association. It has been a particularly difficult year and the work must continue. I am very cognisant of the time that all of you have sacrificed for the well-being of the P&A and the commitment of not only each of you, but that also of your families that enable you to do so. I thank you.